say everything's okay.
Hello, I'm Alana Levine, host of Little Known Facts. I've always been inspired by people who love what they do. On this podcast, I speak with actors who you love to watch do what they love to do. A little known fact about my guest today. When she's a blonde, she can go undetected, but when she's a redhead, it's hard to go undiscovered. Welcome Emmy, Tony, Grammy, and Golden Globe winner, Cynthia Nixon. Cynthia Nixon is my guest today.
Hello, everybody.
And I could go on and on about her resume, but I think at this point the magnificent thing about Cynthia Nixon is the resume sort of exists and speaks for itself. What people don't know...
And that's what Google is for.
That's what Google...
That's why God made Google.
God made Google. We're going to talk about religion in a little while.
Okay.
But I want to talk about yesterday.
Yes.
Yesterday, you and I, after you had sushi for the first time in a long time, went to see Buried Child.
Yes.
A Sam Shepard play that we both realized while watching it we thought maybe we had seen, but in fact we had not.
I think a Pulitzer Prize-winning play, like a really important American play.
Yes, neither of us had seen it. So in a way, as ashamed as I was about that, I also felt like, oh my God, but we're getting to see it the first time together, and that was meaningful. The thing I always love to do with you, maybe more than with anyone else on the planet, is talk about what we just saw together. I feel like people don't do that anymore. They go and we're so quickly on to the next, and I feel like it's part of your religion.
It is part of my religion. And the thing about it is, I feel like this is a segue into an important part of me, right? Which is that my mother had me late for the time that she was living in the 60s. She was 36 when she had me. I was her only child. She wasn't planning on having children. I'm an only child, and she was an only child, and my father was an only child. There was not a lot of, my childhood that was kid stuff. There was a lot of, like, you're 5 now, let's go see Stacy Keach in Hamlet. There was a lot of movies and plays. And partly maybe because I was way too young for these things that I was seeing, but also because I think it was what my mother loved to do. We would go, but that was what we had to talk about.
Right.
We didn't talk about our feelings.
No.
We didn't talk about my imaginary friends. We talked about both of our imaginary people that we'd seen up on stage. And I started directing, after having been an actor since I was 12, I started directing, maybe 2 years ago. And I felt like I was actually, I'm not really good at trying new things. I like to stay in my comfort zone of things that I know I can do really well.
Okay.
Because another thing that neither of my parents were really any good at was sort of sitting there through children learning, right? And so I was expected to sort of do something well, or like,
right.
The learning process was really not a happy place, and we just sort of avoided it.
Well, thank goodness you were a natural student.
Yes, that's true. And
or were you?
Yeah, I feel like, my wife, Christine, still, like I'm having my 50th birthday, and I've invited one of my teachers, and Christine is, like some people would find it distasteful to see their spouse around like an ex-lover, right? To see that kind of, breath quickening, blood, flowing.
It's awkward.
That kind of like, oh, hi, I haven't seen you in so long, right? That's the way I am around my teachers. So,
wait, Mr. Bratsby's is here.
I know.
That would have been mine.
She
Mr. Bratsby's
just
would be mine.
Mr. Bratsby's?
Mr. Bratsby's.
At what age was this?
I was in 6th grade.
Ah, an important time.
An important year.
In math.
In math. I digress. You are having a birthday. Your teacher is coming.
My teacher is coming. Yeah. And Christine is like, oh my, really? Really? And it's not so much that she, doesn't see the appropriateness of, I'm turning 50 on my 50th birthday of having all these people there who are important in my life. But she just doesn't want to see me around this person who shall not be named.
Well, we won't name him, but she will not be named, but I, who will have the great fortune of being at that soiree, will carefully watch.
You'll scope her out, right?
Well, also just to see, like, Cynthia's acting really weird. She's not being herself. Why is she talking like that? Why is she sweating?
Dabbing her forehead like that?
Do you have big feelings or thoughts about turning 50? Is it something
I
that
really
you
don't.
care about? Are you a big birthday celebrator in general?
You know, I feel like before my wife came into my life, I was raised in a fairly puritanical way, I guess, like very not sexually, actually not sexually at all puritanically, but in terms of frugality,
Right.
and working hard,
Right.
and that I think the way I was raised was, you know, you would never spend more money on anything than you absolutely have to.
Right.
You know,
I feel like in the narrative of your particular journey as an actress, your mother looms so large in
So
that
large,
history.
yeah.
A, because she had been an actress. B, because she seems to have been quite a natural director.
well, this
as
is what I was.
well.
This is what I was sort of making my way to say before, which was that when I started directing, you know, pretty recently and pretty late in my life, I felt like I just had such an aptitude for it, and it felt so natural to me. And I realized that in some ways I'm not really like you meet people and they just seem like a born performer. And I have certain aspects that are like that, but many aspects not. And I feel like when I was younger, my family, there wasn't the place for emotions in my family was not very clear. And so I
Right.
think when I was an early teenager and a teenager, I think that a lot of my pent up emotion would come out in roles and I would get to cry or yell, but then you would get accolades for
Right.
that.
And paid.
And right. I don't know. I think that in some ways, the most important part of my personality is I'm a planner, right? I'm always trying to think 4 steps ahead and what am I doing next week and what are we going to be having for dinner and where, do you know what I mean? It's like I'm not by any means a person who plays chess and thinks ahead,
Right.
you know, like in that intellectual
Right.
way.
Well, it's not strategic necessarily.
It's not strategic,
practical.
but it's practical. So what I'm trying to say is, I think, you know, one of the most important things about being an actor, and maybe one of the most important things about being a human, is to be in the moment, right? And I feel like I'm not all that an in the moment kind of a person.
So how
I'm too
do
busy
you-
planning. And so
Right.
in a way, that's a director, right? And I feel like all of these years from a tiny, tiny, tiny little age, you know, my mother tells a story about when I was 3, she took me to The Sound of Music, which is like 3.5 hours at Radio City, you know, grand palatial movie palace. And she was worried, it was like the first movie I'd ever seen. And she was worried I, you know, wouldn't have the attention span. And apparently I turned to her when the movie was over. And I said, no more? Right?
Right.
So she was like, I'm in.
Wow. So my question for you is, where does your dad fit in to this narrative? And how old were you when they got divorced?
Well, you know, that's the funny thing about my parents. They were sort of bohemian, and they were very proud of their bohemianness. And so they actually didn't get divorced.
Okay.
And they separated when I was 6 after having been married for 15 years. But then they didn't actually get divorced until I was in college when my father decided to retire to Mexico. And he thought, if I die out of the country and I'm still married to this person, you know, the wills, and it's all going to be confusing. Let me get divorced so that he's a planner. I mean, if I'm a planner and my mother's a planner, my father was the super, super, super planner. So much so, you know, to the point of actually, I see ways in which it, you know, prevents me from being in the moment. But I think my father's goal in life was to do everything he could not to be in the moment. Because my parents were old and because they had me, like my mother was 36, my dad was 44, which at the time to have a child, like
Right.
my mother would clip articles out of the paper about Cary Grant to be like, he's old and he's a dad and look how happy he is.
Right. My picture of him, this could be completely made up. I feel like he always loomed large as this like Ernest Hemingway sort of character in my mind. Is there any truth to that in terms of if he were cast in a movie, what would the actor...
You never met my dad.
No, he was in Mexico
he
from
was
the
very
time I met
handsome.
you.
He sort of looked like Peter O'Toole a little bit. He always had a mustache. And he served in World War II. And then he got married to a woman in Texas. Her name was Laura, and they had 2 children. I think they had a very, very combative marriage. My father was a very angry, combative person, and I think his first wife was too.
So you have 2 half siblings.
I too have 2 half siblings.
Did you know about them growing up?
I did know about them because shortly before my parents separated, when I was, I guess, probably 5, the younger of the two came out east, as they say in Texas, came out east
Right.
to go to Harvard. And he was not in touch with my father because my father basically left Texas and left his family. And his thought about doing that was to take all the money he had and take half of it and give half of it to them. And then they got divorced. And my father was chronically unemployed and was really terrible at paying his child support, and he was almost always thrown in jail a bunch of times. So finally, things got so strained between him and his ex-wife, understandably, because, I mean, she was totally struggling on her own, that really contact was lost.
Did he reestablish a connection with those children when he was older, or not?
You know,
as
I
far
think
as you know?
his older son, Larry, was too angry,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Randy was 3. And he kept thinking there was a great dad out there somewhere and that what his mom was telling him about that man wasn't true. So all during our lives, Randy kept trying at different points to reestablish contact with us.
So did you guys ever get a chance to sit and talk about it? And could you fill in gaps for him?
It's very hard. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. It's obviously a major thing in his life. How could it not be? And when my dad was dying, Randy got Larry, his older brother, to come. And actually, my dad is not really good at talking about his feelings or, talking about anything emotional. But he did try to apologize to them. And he said, you guys have made such impressive lives for yourself professionally and personally. And, I know that that none of that is due to me,
Right.
and that is really in spite of me.
Right.
And I just hope you feel so proud of that. And I'm so proud of you.
Right.
And he said, I'm just so sorry I wasn't there, right? And I think Larry, my older brother, who was the most angry of the two, said, yeah, it was kind of like a boy called Sue. Which, if you know that country western song, which of course is a perfect thing to say to my dad because he loves Shel Silverstein, and
Right.
he loves, it's country, but it's New York intellectual version of country.
Right.
The story is about a man who abandons his little son, but first he gives him a girl's name so that everywhere he goes, the boy will have to fight for himself and will learn to be a fighter. Yeah.
Which is why after we saw Buried Child yesterday, I was like, I am a Jewish girl from Teaneck, and there is nothing other than maybe someone I once knew had a couch like that. And you were like, no.
Yeah, a little bit like my dad sitting on the couch coughing with his emphysema.
Yes. So how did you decide to raise your children Jewish?
Well, I feel like growing up, there were so many Jewish kids that were my social set, and they were the best of my social set.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, Danny, I think, could not imagine having his children and not raising them Jewish. And I didn't have any problem with that.
So now you have a third child.
Yes.
With your wife.
Yes.
Christine, who did not grow up Jewish.
Right.
Is Max going to be raised differently?
I think so. So we have our last child, Max, with a male couple, right, with 2 gay men, one of whom is the donor and one of whom is the partner of the donor, and we don't really distinguish. And one of those guys is Jewish.
I want to segue to a different topic completely.
Yes.
Which does have to do with rituals, but less religious.
Yes.
Although the theater could be considered our religion at the
definitely,
same time.
I
This
think
is
definitely.
a very clunky segue. I don't know that people are aware that you have almost, maybe you think I'm flattering you, but sort of an encyclopedic memory as well as knowledge of musical theater. This is a great passion of yours.
It is a great passion. Arguably my greatest passion.
I would say that this is a little known fact that people may not know about you. So growing up, were you like with the album cover, reading the lyrics within, listening to musicals?
Well, but at the time, they didn't even have the lyrics. That's a kind of a later Sondheim thing because I'm there with the album of promises.
I can
promises.
picture a chorus line when I think of my own.
But there's no lyrics, right?
No, you're just holding it.
Just holding the album.
Right. And the story of, and there's
the story
always
of, there's a synopsis. Sometimes there's a note by the composer.
I mean, I'm picturing you in your room. There's the Hair album.